I know you didn't come to hear all these things, you came to hear about the circus. So we have Valerie Metzger. She just completed her first year as curator of art and artifacts at the museum, and she has proudly renovated 3 galleries upstairs. And there are 2 that I bet you haven't even seen. Besides those, we have Adventures in Weather and What the Tide Brought In. So if you haven't seen those, as long as you're out today, you might as well go upstairs and see those new exhibitions. Valerie is currently working on her master's degree in applied history and public humanities at the University of Akron. Prior to being at the museum, she received a BA in interior design, which shows in everything she does. And she enjoyed a career in commercial architecture and design. She loves combining her experience in visual composition with historical research skills to create new exhibitions, and she's just a wonder at it. Welcome.
Thank you, Margie. That was such a nice introduction. And thanks everyone who made it today and found parking and came out in the cold to learn about some of the circus stars in Massillon's history. Over the past year, we've been focused on updating the galleries on the second floor that house our permanent collections. And we began with the gallery named for Dr. Immel, who carved and donated his incredible miniature circus, which is both a work of art and a historic artifact. This is one of our artifacts that is on permanent display, and it's one of the visitors' favorites. We also have an extensive circus collection, and after examining this, it includes books, pamphlets, costumes, props, photos, posters, programs, and tickets. After we explored this collection, the new exhibit began to take shape. And Small But Mighty is focused on Massillon's local circus history with Dr. Immel's diorama at the center. In our research, we found that Massillon was an important hub of circus activity, and people participated in 3 major roles: as entrepreneurs, entertainers, or enthusiasts. And these represent the 3 sections of the exhibition. And the title, Small But Mighty, references the size of the city relative to its circus contributions, and also captures the tiny scale of the individual pieces of Immel's miniature model relative to the impressive impact of the whole. So this presentation will be in 3 acts. We'll review the time when circuses were most active in Massillon, as well as many other cities across the country. The popularity of traveling circuses peaked between the late 19th and mid-20th centuries, and the exhibit is concentrated mainly on this period. From the 1890s to the 1930s, Massillon was a crossroads of circus activity, which is illustrated nicely by this photo of a parade at the corner of First Street Southeast and Lincoln Way around 1925. So we had 2 circus owners right here in town that operated from a home base in Massillon, but their goals and their methods were quite different from one another. Albert Vetter was the son of a wealthy family. His father, Jacob, owned a sand and stone business and a bank in Massillon. And in the early 1900s, Vetter received a $20,000 inheritance that he used towards starting his own circus. He bought all of his supplies and hired a full staff right away, and even had wagons custom designed. He was just ready to get started. And on the right, we have J.J. Evans, who represents more of a bootstrapping approach. As a teenager working in a coal mine in Trumbull County, he taught the mine's working mule how to do simple tricks to entertain his coworkers. And he used this newfound skill to train horses and dogs, and he built his dog and pony show slowly and reinvested ticket sales back into his business. And next we have a comparison of the advertisements of the 2 men's circuses. On the left, we can see Albert Vetter's, which is on newsprint. He was a little bit earlier, and he was really concerned with the Victorian era manners and morality. He came of age in the 1890s, and this stance was probably influenced also by his family's social position. And he advertised a new model of show that he held to a high standard, and some of his promises included that his shows were honorably conducted, honestly advertised, with morality, originality, and overwhelming richness, with everything new, bright, and brilliant. And that last promise ties back to his large initial investment of getting all of the best equipment. And then on the right, we have a J.J. Evans poster, and he was not as worried about appealing to a refined audience. He was proud to show off his animal training skills, and he seemed to be more interested in delighting people and making them laugh rather than treating them to a spectacle. And you can see both of these upstairs in the exhibition too. And then focusing in on Albert Vedder's circus, he burned fast and bright. He put on 135 shows in 1893, but his season began and ended with heavy rain and winds, which are not ideal conditions for traveling with wagons or for setting up tents. And unfortunately, 1894 started out the same way, except on top of that, he was also sick with the mumps. So this fully loaded version of Albert Vedder's circus with all the bells and whistles and the wild animal menagerie lasted just for those 2 seasons, and he had to auction off all of his animals and supplies in 1894. He still dreamed of the circus, and he made a comeback in 1898 with the Vedder's World's Greatest Dog and Pony Show, which is pictured here. And it traveled around this area. It would be featured on its own or as an act within a larger fair or at a carnival. So the comeback did not last long, and just a few months later, Albert sold the Dog and Pony Show to another circus owner, and they combined their shows. He was still supposed to retain rights to his part of the show, but he was also involved in his family businesses, which probably took much of his time. So this venture did not last long, and unfortunately, Vedder died in 1903 at the age of only 32. Meanwhile, the other homegrown circus featured in our exhibit belongs to J.J. Evans, and he started his Dog and Pony Show in 1910, and in 1914 he relocated to Massillon, and he headquartered his circus here for 32 years. He welcomed visitors to drop in and see the circus animals and equipment at his winter headquarters during the off-season when his show was not traveling. And he put most of his effort into training the animals. He trained dogs to imitate a boxing match with gloves. He trained horses to copy popular dances, and his monkeys rode tricycles and smoked pipes. And he even had an elephant for 1 year. The star of Evans' circus, though, was Daniel the Great, who was his favorite horse, and also Evans centered his PR materials around Daniel. We can see that on this business envelope that brags about Daniel breaking 20 records in 1915, and he was known as the horse with the human brain and the horse that fights fire and flames. And that was based on his most famous trick, the grand finale of the show. He would save a baby, which was a doll, from a burning building and put the doll into a cradle, and then Daniel himself would get into a horse-sized bed and pull the covers over him. And then on this slide, you can see the evolution of the circus. He changed the name to the J.J. Evans Trained Animal Circus. He's using more color in the advertisements. This article from the Independent from the 1930s shows that the circus was still going strong, stating that J.J. Evans will present his own educated animals and 30 other circus acts, a full circus program to the tune of a real circus band and a calliope. And his final circus production was in 1946, which was less than a year before his death in 1947. On to the next section of the exhibition, we'll start talking about some of the notable entertainers who passed through the city. And first we have Charles McKinney, who is one of my favorites, and he came from just a few miles down the road in Canton. McKinney's scrapbook is just a goldmine of circus history. It's pictured there unopened on the left. And he did us such a wonderful service by compiling this scrapbook that covers his career from about 1885 to 1900. He was a contortionist who went by the stage name Zella the Human Frog. And he performed here locally, but he also traveled around most of North America and also Europe. Zella's father was the Stark County Sheriff Frank McKinney, who lived in Massillon at one point as well. So this is the inside cover of his scrapbook, and it leaves a very detailed life of this performer. And unfortunately, there are no photographs, but it's absolutely overflowing with ads and newspaper clippings, contracts, and letters and programs. So here we'll take a look at Zella's local connections. We have a program from Balzer's Music Hall in Canton, where he performed every night for at least a week in 1893. During this same year, he was on the program as the male contortionist in one of Albert Wetter's shows, which is circled in red. We don't know where that show was performed, but we see the connection between those two. And then in the bottom right, there's a very exciting blurb from the Independent that proves Zella performed here in Massillon at Mike Barr's Opera House, and he also had a special car arranged back to Canton with his friends. So he was a bit of a celebrity. Another very important Massillon connection here. This is one of Zella's posters that he cut up and pasted into his book. And in the lower right of his poster, he always had the message, "Keep off the grass," of course, a nod to Jacob Coxey and a sign of Zella's political awareness, and that this page was made sometime in 1894 or after. So these are just a handful of the hundreds of examples of the positive reviews and the newspaper clippings that he collected, so we'll look at a few of these. One of them is an endorsement from a theater manager in San Francisco that his act is great, having just closed a highly successful 4 weeks engagement at my house. And then along with that, there are the newspaper reviews, which include, "As a contortionist, Zella was indeed a marvel, perhaps the best ever seen here. Zella is the greatest living contortionist, and his feats are marvelous and miraculous. He introduced some of the most difficult feats imaginable with a precision and flexibility heretofore unknown to the acrobatic world." And finally, Zella appeared in his dazzling, bewildering performance, doing many feats that seem impossible to the human form. Truly a wonder and well worth the full price of admission. You might be surprised to learn, as I was, that Zella was far from the only human frog in the entertainment world at this time. So we have a whole collection of human frogs here. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't have any photos of him performing in his suit, but we were able to find some ideas of what the suit and the maneuvers may have looked like. So the closest thing we have is his own illustration there in the upper left, where he's a serpent. Sometimes he called himself a serpent, but he was majority of the time billing himself as the human frog. He also had those drawings of the frogs that show us the types of balancing and flexibility tricks he may have performed. The ad for Wilton the Frogman was found in his book, so he may have influenced this performer or been influenced by him. And then above him, we do have some photos later on. This is a European human frog performer, and you can see him balancing and also wearing the suit, which we found usually the head was made out of paper mache. And then down in the lower right, we have a female performer in a frog suit. And she and her husband, they were the DeMarlos, and they were a married couple who performed a show as singing, dancing, acrobatic frogs through the 1920s. And the New York State Museum has some really great materials in their collection if you're interested in learning more about them. And then Zella and all of the performers in the exhibit faced real physical danger, and they all sustained injuries. Luckily, in Zella's case, they didn't end his career, but they forced him to take a few extended breaks. So in one of these accidents, he was performing at Cedar Point and broke 2 ribs. And in another, he was working on gymnastic rings and fell and broke both of his wrists. So even with those injuries, Zella enjoyed a long career that he retired from when it just wasn't fun for him anymore, as he gave an interview to the Canton Repository after he had retired. And he just returned to Canton and enjoyed a peaceful retirement living with his mother. All right, next. While Zella was lacking in photographs, Chas Forrest left us hundreds, which is really great to keep the continuity going about the behind-the-scenes circus life. And in 2020, David Forrest Downs, who was the son of Chas Forrest, donated his father's substantial collection of circus photos and documents to the museum. And they reveal a lot about life on the road and the behind-the-scenes operations of the circus and camaraderie among the performers. So Forrest began his circus career just as Zella was wrapping his up, again giving us that nice through line of continuity of what was going on in the circus. And Chas was born in Hamilton, Ontario in 1906. We have his card here from when he crossed the border to the US, going through Buffalo. He came to join the circus, and his first job was actually here in Massillon with J.J. Evans, which is shown on his resume. He joined Evans Circus in 1924, and his career lasted until 1948. And Forrest was an acrobat who worked on the high bar, the horizontal bars, and the tightrope. And he's pictured here in the center with a couple of his friends in 1925. Chas Forrest made a lot of friends, and he also fell in love more than once in the circus. He was married 4 times, and he had his son David with wife Sylvia. David is the one who donated the photos to us. And when Sylvia wanted to leave the circus to raise their child, Chas Forrest actually couldn't bear to leave his chosen circus family, and the 2 divorced shortly after their son was born. And here he is showing off his strength, balance, and his nerves of steel. So in the first picture, he's balancing on a ladder, which is on top of a table. Looks like in the middle of the neighborhood, just working out and doing some simple tricks. Then in the center, he is the one doing the handstand on the handlebars of a bicycle, while his colleague Eddie Belletti drives across pedals across a tight rope in the air. And this was one of their signature routines that he performed with the Belletti troupe for a number of years. And then we also have proof of Sylvia's own fame. She was a bareback horse riding expert and was profiled in the newspaper. Beside the highs and lows of his relationships, there were other ups and downs to Chas's life traveling with the circus. One that is a common occurrence across a lot of different circuses are train wrecks, which unfortunately affected circus operations and resulted in tragic losses. Forrest photographed this wreck when he was, sorry, I need to go back. He photographed this wreck when he was in the Algae Barn Circus and they were traveling in Canada. Then in the upper right, he took this photo of the performers eating dinner outside because their tent blew down. And on the back, he noted that this happened in 1927 and says, "We didn't have room for the cookhouse, so we had to eat outside. Fun? Question mark." His photo collection is very special, and we've displayed as many as we could in the exhibition. We have 75 that are all together, and I would encourage everyone to take a closer look at those today if you have time. All right, our next performer is another Charles, but he went by Chuck. We had noticed in our research that Dr. Immel collected quite a few items from Chuck Satea. And one of them included his military trunk, which seemed out of place with his collection of circus paraphernalia. And we might have actually missed it if it weren't for the label that was added to the front that says Chuck O. the Clown. If you can see that with the wood grain on the front of his trunk. Satea was working as a circus performer in Chicago when he enlisted in World War II. And his enlistment card is shown here alongside his trunk. Chuck, or Charles, ended up stationed in Northern Africa and Europe during the war. He traveled with the 59th Evacuation Hospital. An evacuation hospital was a mobile hospital where injured soldiers could be treated and stabilized until they were able to travel back home to the US. And we found that there are a couple of great sources that chronicle the history of this particular unit. And these sources gave us a lot of the information that we found on Chuck Satea. The first one is a website called Dear Folksies, which is run by Linda Bine, and we have a snippet of her website shown here. On this site, she houses all of the letters and photos that her father, Dr. Renee Bine, sent home to his parents when he was stationed with the 59th Evacuation Hospital. And the website is called Dear Folksies because he started every letter with that greeting. Her site is really great for searching, and we found the Who's Who button, which gave us a lot of information on everyone in the unit, and especially Chuck Satea. Also, Chuck's nephew, John Satea, wrote a book that's titled The 59th Evacuation Hospital, The Unarmed Heroes of World War II. And this book explains the purpose of the hospital and tracks the complete route of the unit. And he also included some biographical information on his uncle. And here we see the tented hospital, which is reminiscent of some of the traveling circus tents also. So Chuck Satea seemed to be a born performer, and whether he was in the circus or the military, he put his talent to good use. And we can see, I have part of a letter from Dr. Renee Bine that he sent home in 1943, explaining that Carmen Miranda paid a visit to them. And he wrote, sorry, I went ahead again. He wrote, "Actually, you must understand that Carmen herself was not here, but our Corporal Satea, an old hand at the circus. Anyway, he has perfected a Carmen Miranda act that is a wow." And he went on to perform this several more times during their time overseas. And luckily, Satea returned safely from the war, and he rejoined the circus. Then after a bad fall from the trapeze, he went back into the military, and this time he was in the Air Force. He produced theatrical shows while he was on the base and was later stationed in England. And we will meet up with him a little later in the presentation to see what became of him. All right, for the second act, we'll move on to the enthusiasts, who are the people who completed projects that celebrated the circus. And these projects connect directly to the Massillon circuses. Their projects were all begun and completed after World War II, and they looked back fondly on the time that they saw as the peak of the circus. And this photo is a carnival that happened on the Schuster lot in town. Our first creative project honoring the circus is Dr. Immel's model. He started it in 1945 when he returned home from the war. He began carving this miniature circus. It's one of the cornerstones of the museum's collection, And he based his model on memories of visiting the circus during his childhood with his uncle. And there are over 2,600 individual pieces in the circus. There are 36 elephants and 91 wagons, 7 tents, and over 2,000 people. And you could look at it, you could look at it every day and notice something new. Then, while Immel was in the early stages of creating his model, in 1951, another Macedonian was hard at work on a project about his own connection to the circus, and that was Sherlock Holmes Evans, who was the creatively named son of J.J. Evans, the owner of the circus that we met earlier. And Sherlock Holmes was an attorney and public speaker here in town. As a boy, he also performed in his father's circus, and he absolutely loved it. But he was also injured in a horseback riding accident, and he couldn't become a circus performer, so he became an attorney, and he also did a lot of public speaking here in town. And in 1951, he published Father Owned a Circus. This book he refers to himself in the introduction as fictional biography, and he says that some compromises have been made, but the basic story is genuine, truthful, and moving. And we also have a story about him in the newspaper. You can see him with his book and also his father's circus photo in the background, his poster in the background there. Now, when the book was published, there was a really great crossover moment with Dr. Immel's model. And there was a book signing held at Reliable Office Supply downtown, and customers could buy their copy of Father Owned a Circus, have it signed by the author, and also see Dr. Immel's model in its early stages. So if you read this book, which I recommend that you do, Sherlock Holmes was passionate about the circus and also the city of Massillon. And for example, I put an excerpt here where he recounted a time when his father's circus was left in ruins from a flood, and his neighbors pitched in to help repair and buy new equipment. He wrote, "The citizens of Massillon, Ohio, famed all over the world as the city of champions since the days of the immortal Massillon Tiger world champion football team, demonstrated their sportsmanship once again." So we can see, of course, this ties back to football. And we also have one other important football connection, and Sherlock Holmes Evans was Paul Brown's brother-in-law. Sherlock married Paul's sister Marion in 1948. And I'll also mention Margaret Coffey, who is here, found a great signed copy of this book on eBay. It was signed by Dr. Paul Paulson, is that correct? Okay, who was the father of the first OB? All right. The next project that we have a record of is a research article for a circus magazine. In 1952, the circus historian George Tyndall was researching an article for The White Tops, which is the official publication of the Circus Fans Association of America. And that magazine is still in print today. He was looking for some information on Albert Wetter's circus, so he wrote to the curator of the museum at the time, Albert Heiss. The two wrote back and forth, and Tyndall was trying to confirm who made Albert Wetter's circus wagons and what happened to them when his show folded. Tyndall also wrote this History of the Circus in America, which is part of our collection that was donated by Dr. Immel. All right, so they concluded after writing back and forth that Adam Schultz, a blacksmith in Dalton, Ohio, fabricated the wagons, and they also believed that Wetter sold his wagons, tents, and possibly his seating to Jacob Coxey for use in his campaign marches. And the finished article was published in the December 1953 holiday issue of The White Tops. And it's a lengthy article with illustrations and photographs, and we have a copy of that in the exhibition if you would like to read it. To coincide with the article, Tyndall also designed a Christmas card that he mailed to the museum, and we have several copies of this. The Christmas card has an image of Wetter's 1893 bandwagon, which is pictured at the top, and then the upgraded, ornate 1894 bandwagon is shown below. Now we've returned back to Chuck Satea, our friend who was over in the 59th Evacuation Hospital. In 1975, he came to Massillon because he and Dr. Immel were acquainted, and that is likely through their membership in the International Circus Model Builders Association. And our records show that Satea actually contributed some pieces to Dr. Immel's model, and the two met at Immel's home and recorded an interview in which Satea speaks about his colorful circus career as an acrobat and a clown. And he was actually in the first graduating class of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Clown College in 1968. And so Immel's friendship with Satea also demonstrates how well connected he was within the circus world, definitely more than the average fan. And we have a QR code where you can listen to that interview. If you visit the exhibition, you can hear their voices, which is really nice. And then in Act 3, we have Massillon as a destination for circus history. So we've covered a lot of our big personalities. Albert Wetter and J.J. Evans were the entrepreneurs. We had Charles McKinney, aka Zella, Chaz Forrest, and Chuck Satea as our entertainers. And then Sherlock Holmes Evans, Dr. Immel, and George Tyndall are some of our enthusiasts. So while in the past, Massillon was a hub of circus activity and an inspiration for different circus projects, it's now a destination for circus history. And the exhibition has just a fraction of the circus collection on display right now. Here are some of the other circus artifacts that are currently being stored safely, waiting for their turn to be in an exhibit whenever we change the gallery again and uncover a new circus story. So you can see the costumes, we have some instruments, tools, and props, and we have racks of posters and artwork related to the circus. There are a few more examples here that really struck me, but they didn't make it into the exhibit. The one of the boy bringing the water to the elephant. We have this circus route book from Ringling Brothers' 1946 circus that shows that they stopped here in Massillon on their route. We have a beautiful calendar of these illustrated circus wagons, and then this sideshow ad for performing dogs. For all of the individuals that we studied for the exhibit, the circus was more than a casual interest, and it was really an inseparable part of their everyday lives. And so, having our model and our large collection, we hope to attract more donations, like in 2020 when we got Chaz Forrest photos, so that we can uncover even more of the circus history and these hidden stories. So I want to thank everyone for your attention today and coming out in the cold.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.